All right, Coogs House. So, that one happened, I guess, huh? Didn't it? Did it just happen?
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach, Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater, can stop by. And tonight there might be a few of those. Please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you listen to Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. Appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you're listening to this on the audio platforms after the fact, because I'm not going to upload to the audio platforms till probably tomorrow or the next day, good on you, because that was a painful game, and I hope that means you're taking care of yourself and something else after watching Houston Cougars lose to TCU 36-13. If you're with us on YouTube live, let's talk about what just happened. And if you are not, well, kudos for tuning in after the fact. Again, hope you took care of yourself after that game, because that was a rough one, to say the least. Now, the way this breakdown is going to go for me is I typically like to talk about what happened and what comes next, and what about the rest of the Big 12. Just kind of look around the conference. It's a Saturday night catch-up show to see how the game went. People are already talking about firing Dane in the comments, and frankly, I'm sure you're not alone. I'm sure if this gets out to Twitter and stuff like that, and people get in here, those things will continue to flood it. But I do want to talk about the game itself and kind of recap some things I noticed as far as what happened. I think that I want to talk some about the defense, some about the special teams, and then we'll talk a lot about the offense, and that's how that section will go. It might go a little long, and then we'll talk about what comes next after that. So as far as the defense goes, I maintain when you ask a team to be on the field for as long as the Houston Cougar defense was on the field, and I think the third quarter kind of threw some of the numbers off, but Houston was on defense, and admittedly, like, part of defense, I guess, is getting off the field too, and maybe I'm giving too much credit to that. But it was on the field for a lot of snaps on Saturday night, or tonight, I guess, if you're listening with us live. Again, this is a live post-game show. A lot of snaps, and they gave up 560 yards, which is obviously like probably 200 too many. But I feel like we need to take some credits. Like we talked at the start of the season, like depth was going to be a problem, and all those kinds of things. And they're on the field a lot. The offense didn't help them out with that. And frankly, there was some special team stuff where they didn't necessarily get helped out there either. But it was a rough outing from the Cougs. Defensively, though, I would say there were bright spots, right? The defensive line had a lot of moments where in the past game they kind of shut Chandler Morris and that stuff out of it, right? I mean, they were getting after him for sure. He had to let the ball go pretty early. Laid some big hits on the quarterback, made the quarterback a runner. Out the gut run stuff was a problem at times, and then other times it felt like they turned it on and stuffed it for a 1 or 2 yard gain, if not a loss, right? So the kind of boom and bust there has continued, but not as bad as I think it could have been, especially without Nwankwo back in the lineup. Who knows what would have been without him? Special teams, obviously, this sounds somewhat redundant or obvious because Matthew Golden had the lone touchdown and a kickoff return, the lone touchdown for Houston in that football game. But honestly, who knows how's that game go if you don't have Parker Jenkson's big return, or frankly, Malik Fleming sparked some life right before halftime with his field goal return, a couple big punt return, or kickoff returns besides just the one that went to the house. Who knows what this game could have looked like had them, especially teams not been up to performance. I know they missed a field goal early, but a couple good punts as well, and they made some field goals. This thing could have been uglier had the special teams not been there. But the story of the game and what happened, and now we're going to talk for probably a chunk of time here, is that the offense had just 12 first downs, had just 280 yards, 225 of those are passing yards. That means a whopping 55 yards on the ground. Couldn't stay on the field, frankly. A lot of 3 and outs. The Houston Cougars, I think the play that drew the most ire and probably had the most eruptions on Twitter was the 4th and 5, in which Donovan Smith sprints out to roll out to his right after being flushed, and ultimately has to throw the ball over the head of a tight end because there's no one there to throw the ball to. I could get into schematics on what I would think an offense is probably supposed to do there and all those kinds of things, but I really think that was more just like emblematic of what it looked like was happening all night. And it seems very, very clear that 3 weeks into the season, this football team on offense is still not on the same page. Yes, they reeled off 35 unanswered points against Rice. Yes, that really did happen. But even those 35 points against Rice, there were several of those moments that were just giant plays. And second, you'd also imagine like some of those plays are just my athlete's better than your athlete, right? Because you're playing a team that, in theory, does not have the same kind of athletes. The offense was rough. There's no way around it. I'm generally a pretty positive guy about things, and I can find things to say that you could learn from in this game, but the offense is hard to find positives in for sure. We talked on Friday in the pregame, 3 keys and that kind of stuff, ways to exploit a 3-5 defense. And frankly, they opened up with some deep crossers to Sam Brown over the middle and stuff like that. I was like, oh, this is exactly what I'm saying the recipe is. And then it felt like they had a couple drops. And then after those drops, it just felt like everyone was disconnected. And everyone meaning coaches, quarterbacks, centers, guards, receivers, tight ends, all of it just felt disconnected. And I don't know that there are very easy fixes to get reconnected. I know they already pulled the players only meeting card, and I think those kinds of things are important. I don't mean to say they don't fix things, but it doesn't look like it fixed a whole lot of the offense. The defense looked better, and so I can understand how you could argue like things that were positive came out of that. But the offense was atrocious, right? There's just no way to go about it. An offense that has a guy with the resume that Dana Holgorsen has coaching it, that has a athlete like Donovan Smith playing quarterback. It's his first year in the system, sure, but he's a Big 12 quarterback. He started games to this conference, right? You've got speed at wideouts. Again, Matthew Golden is a pro. Sam Brown is playing like one. You got a left tackle that will be drafted this spring, right? There's no reason to not score a freaking touchdown. And I'm not swearing on this podcast. It's not a swearing podcast, but I will say there's no excuse to not score a freaking touchdown. That TCU defense is not good, right? And I understand that like TCU was in the college football playoff championship game last year, and I've touted that horn probably more than a lot of Houston Cougar fans have. But I will say that that's a very different looking defense. We saw Colorado tear them up. Right, we saw Nicholls State move the ball against them, and that defense will probably be the downfall of TCU whenever they do fall down this season. And Houston couldn't score. It's not that Houston couldn't score a lot. I kind of thought this kind of would be the kind of thing that would be a barn burner type game. Frankly, as we talked on Thursday and Friday, I predicted 41-38 Houston. TCU scored 36. I think I gauged how that side of the ball would go pretty darn well. I'm not trying to tout like that. Looks like I got that one right, but the offense, woof. Now, I thought there would be ways to exploit this team in the middle that they didn't. And if I'm going to give TCU credit for practicing, because they do practice too, it looked like the way they covered up the middle of the field was by getting Donovan out of the pocket by rushing the middle of the offensive line. Middle offensive line had trouble pass blocking throughout the night, had trouble pulling around to run block those guys too. I mean, that was. We're not looking at Pro Football Focus grades in a live post-game show, but those guys I don't think would grade out very well if we're going to be honest. Just not a good night. People have good nights, people have bad nights. That was a bad night. That said, if I'm looking at ways to fix this game, we'll do in the what comes next segment, probably like what I would push going forward. One thing that has to happen is receivers can't have drops. This offense is not good enough to function with the drops that they had. Matthew Golden had 2 that come to mind that were bad, one of which I think would have been a touchdown on a giant play in the fourth quarter. And at that point, it was still just a 2-score game. It 16 points because you need 2 in the 2-point conversions, but that still would have been a, if they missed the 2-point conversion, it's a 10-point game. Like that is still within reach for the Cardiac Cougs if he catches that ball and continues to sprint in the end zone because he's behind the defense, ball hits him in the hands. Matthew Golden's a pro. And that's, I keep referring to him as a pro. There were people talking about him being a pro based on just his freshman football season. He's got that kind of potential. He is that good. He just has not played like it through really 3 games. He had some bright spots in the Rice game, but really has not played like it thus far. I got comments here. I'll probably pull up. Have Rice was just the beginning. I've got that was brutal. It was brutal. Fire the offensive coordinator. That's kind of funny because I don't know that there technically is an offensive coordinator, right? And that kind of kind of the problem. Maybe hire an offensive. Maybe that's hire. Maybe is a misspelling? Hire the offensive coordinator. Let me see. We got people talking about the bright spot being special teams. In a closer game, I wouldn't say that that's necessarily true, but in this game, that probably is. Someone's agreeing with Oliver to whoever's agreeing with Oliver. I will say, and there's other stuff there that gets a little more brutal, and I'm just only so much negativity I can put on the screen at once. I look at this though, and I look at how the offense is discombobulated and disconnected, and how the guys need to catch the football when it's thrown to them. But I also admit that part of the reason they need to catch football when it's thrown to them is because there's not enough room for error in this offense from head coach to quarterback to offensive line to running backs to receivers. There's not enough room for error to have a drop, let alone 3 or 4. And it feels like every game now we're at 3 or 4 for a room that will make spectacular, the wide receiver room will make top of the Big 12 caliber plays on one snap, and then 2 snaps later false start, and the 3rd snap later drop the football. And it just, that up and down, the inconsistency is killer. And I can't explain why that's happening, but I can't explain that is a problem with this offense, because it seems like you can't take 2 steps forward and then a third, right? There seems to always be something pulling it back. There's 3 weeks in the season, admittedly, maybe about a quarter of the way through. Maybe we're overreacting. Maybe the other 75% of the season proves us all wrong. It just feels like this is a trend where Houston has problems catching the football. And it's good athletes doing it, right? I see some people on Twitter talking about maybe playing the freshman wide receivers. At this point, I feel like it's safe to say that they're trying to redshirt as many guys as possible from a very highly ranked recruiting class to kind of stack some classes together and have a talented roster later. But you also need to win some football games, right? And so that's the way that goes. As far as freshmen go that need to play more, this will probably be my last thing, I think, from what happened tonight. I think if you're looking for a single bright spot on offense, it's weirdly a kid that didn't play a lot in Parker Jenkins, right? Now, I think Parker Jenkins needs to be playing. I understand he's a freshman. I understand a running back load is a lot for a freshman. He had 4 carries for 15 yards and a giant kickoff return as well. He's got a different gear in the way he runs, right? He runs differently than other running backs on this roster do. Stacey Sneed is a pass catcher. He's good out of the backfield and that kind of stuff. Brandon Campbell's good between the tackles, but we're not necessarily getting a lot of movement between the tackles. We're doing a lot of covering up, not a lot of driving, right? There's just the reality of what we got going on there. I think the speed that Parker Jenkins brings with him is a nice thunder and lightning combination of what Donovan Smith has with him. And I don't really understand what the kid's got to do to play more, unless the hope is they redshirt him. But if that's the hope, then I don't know why we're even playing him on kickoff and stuff like that, because he seems like to be a very vital part of what we're doing in those instances. Admittedly, he could play next week and still get redshirted after that. And so maybe that'd be the 4 games, right? But that's just not something I completely understand or would go with. And so, well, I want to talk about what comes next, and that'll probably also, as we talk about what comes next, lead into talking some about tonight as well, just from a little bit different angle. There are a lot of you guys talking about someone who might need a new job. I'll leave it at that about the comments. But if you're looking to hire someone, you should check out LinkedIn Jobs, because these days every new potential hire can feel like a high stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. The right people for your team faster and for free. Maybe an offensive coordinator along the way. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Now, I have to say that I feel like there's a lot of comments going back and forth on Twitter that maybe are starting to bleed into this. And, I typically try and stay at least even keel, if not positive. And so if we're going to stay even keel, because there's not a whole lot to be positive about, where this offense goes, right? First of all, I feel like if there weren't any drops, then Houston probably gets in the 25 to 30 point range, 28, 20, whatever, 27. And if that's the case, this game's, a 10-point game, a 1-score game. Who knows what happens down the stretch, right? It's a whole different thing. So at some point, it's easy to put things on the coach, and I think a lot of people go to that very simple place to put things on the coach. It seems like every weekend you have half of America saying fire their own coach, right? While that may very well be, a stance to take and a thing to fix, and coaching needs to be addressed and so on, right? Guys also have to catch the football. That's an athlete thing. And I see a couple here talking about like recruiting and this and that. Like these were highly touted recruits that are coming in to catch football, right? Like they've got to. It's not a recruiting thing. They were highly touted recruits, right? Matthew Golden's one of the highest touted recruits to ever come through the university. He's got to catch football, right? Just Manjack was a highly touted recruit, then went to USC originally, and then came to Houston. He's got to catch the football, right? That's just the way that goes. And this is the coach in me coming out where I'm like, catch the darn ball, kid, but like catch the darn ball, kid. Right? Like I don't know. That's got to get fixed. I do think that it's funny that last week it was all Doug Belk this, Doug Belk that, and I don't think that that's the consensus after even giving up 36 points to TCU, right? Because again, when you think about how many snaps they had to play on the field and how short field some of those things were, and they did have some fourth down stops or some third down stops and stuff like that, couple takeaways, like that comment's not as fluid tonight, or not as happening as much tonight. I look at what comes next on the roster, and so I mentioned catch football and fixing stuff from a player's perspective. I also think you're going to start to see even more of the big play stuff. I don't look at this offense as the kind of offense that is going to have a lot of success unless they evolve a lot more quarterback run game, and they seem to be hesitant to do that. I don't see this as an offense going to have a whole lot of success chipping the ball down the field, short play after short play after short play. And that may unfortunately mean a lot of boom bust kind of games where we're chucking deep balls to Sam Brown and Matt Golden and seeing what happens, and they come down with it. Cool, let's go score. If they don't, all right, turn it, kick it over. That's not the most sound way to play a football game, but if you know your team, right, and you know that that's what you got to do, that's kind of what you got to do. I heard June Jones talk one time. June Jones, coach at Hawaii back when they had Colt Brennan. Talk about air raid stuff, right? And he said every fourth or fifth play they're throwing in the end zone. And when asked at a coaching clinic why, he was like, because we can't run 10 plays in a row. Like he just said, point blank at Hawaii, he was like, we don't have the athletes to go 10 straight plays without a mistake. So every fifth play we're throwing at the end zone, right? It almost feels like because of the amount of mistakes that happen, right? The shooting yourself in the foot kind of mistakes, that might be how Houston has to handle offense going forward, is we got to just take shots at the end zone frequently. And if they work, they work, right? Now, I'm sure on a rewatch tomorrow, because I'll rewatch this thing on Sunday like I typically do. I'm preparing for the week. Probably just once, but some of that stuff I might go back and look at a second time. I will say that maybe something will pop up as far as more quick fix or whatever. It looked like to me like, there were just some spots where we got out-athleted, right? We opened the game trying to run counter plays and dart plays, which are pulling backside guards and tackles, if not both. And we had trouble getting around to pull because of the penetration of the defensive line, right? We are a team that's built on pass blocking for the last 4 years, trying to run different run plays. We try to run zone stuff. We don't really have a more traditional zone type running back. Insert that Parker Jenkins kid I was talking about a second ago. More commentary here. Let's see. Any of these want to come up here? We're really disappointed lost Rice and the Pistol coach as TCU, which is not on a team. Well, Oliver's upset. No, I feel like as I'm sitting here wrapped around, like there's not like a singular play. I mentioned the golden catch that didn't happen because he dropped it. If I'm thinking about like a singular play, like think about as a positive moving forward, I will say there's a moment in the first quarter, really kind of in the first half. We were down at 7 at halftime, where I feel like, okay, Houston belongs in this league. And I maintain, I think Houston really does and did show they belong in the Big 12 in a lot of different ways. I mean, Houston's not the only team that TCU is going to beat by 20 points this season. They're just not. I think the disappointing thing is not that it was bad from those perspectives by any stretch, but more like they didn't have to. Right? Like as you're sitting there nodding with me, like this feels like a game that Houston should have been far more competitive in, because for like 3-ish quarters, they were more competitive in it too. right? Again, it was a 2-score game through the middle of the fourth quarter. And it was 2-score game through the middle of the fourth quarter with an offense that was anemic and slow. And so what comes next in that, there's people on this comment thread calling for the quarterback, and I have enough people saying that, having watched the competition, that the right guy got chosen on that, as far as who's in camp, that I'm not sure I'm going down that avenue quite yet. I know that, as popular as finding the coaches for every team that loses, the next most popular thing to do is is backup quarterback, right? Like, those are just two very common, simple solutions that I'm not sure are the way to go down this path. Donovan Smith does open up some things for Houston as far as running the football. It just seems interesting that they didn't want to go that path tonight. Frankly, the same play I mentioned earlier where he sailed the ball over a tight end's head while he was scrambling around on fourth down and receivers wouldn't come back to him. Honestly, the tight end is blocking and the receivers aren't coming back to him. And that, I would say, needs to get fixed, right? Receivers can be running scramble rules, coming back to the ball if you're deep, going deep if you're close, and don't need to be blocking like the tight end. But that looked like to me like they assumed he was going to run, and that's not really what he's trying to do. Frustrating one. That's just a frustrating football game. Really, really. Sam Brown led us in catches, though. 5 catches for 99 yards. God, that's a frustrating football game because they weren't that good, man. Like, Houston should have won that football game. Houston had him at halftime where they probably wanted him to be, right? Like, come out the second half, get a couple things fixed. That was a bad game. All right, so Houston played poorly. Before we jump into what happened around the Big 12, we'll talk more about Houston and what happened around the Big 12. But if you're like me and you took a loss tonight because Houston took a loss tonight, let me tell you where you can go get a win. Now, the best place to go get a win is at FanDuel.com because it's America's #1 sportsbook, and you can get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 on get $200 back in bonus bets, guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. They've got the line set for the Houston and Indianapolis game currently as a 1-point game. That is more or less a pick'em, folks. More or less a pick'em. Interesting to see that happen with C.J. Stroud and Anthony Richardson and all. I guess, is Anthony Richardson playing? We're still TBD. That's still a pick on right now. Over under set at 39.5. I weirdly think I'm taking the over in that one, although I got burned on that tonight. And I'm going to do it at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, got some more comments here. BYU struggled against Sam Houston State. Our offense doesn't have a chance. BYU, for what it's worth, also beat Arkansas tonight. So this might be worth mentioning. I don't know if that means Sam Houston State is good. I don't know if that means that BYU looked past them. I don't know if that means that Arkansas is bad, but worth pointing out that does look like BYU beat Arkansas. And then people talk about the quarterback play. This one says Smith is not comfortable in this offense. Decision making is late and indecisive. He's an accident waiting to happen. Da, da, da. Now, I think that what's interesting is, like, of course he's late if he's also slow and indecisive, right? He's making his decision, making his reads, and it's a totally new offense, and they're asking him to do things that bluntly Texas Tech did not ask him to do. I think the deal in my head was I kind of anticipated some of those growth some, not as many as we're seeing, some of those growth moments from Donovan. He is he is the man here. It's his first time in this offense. It's a very different offense than anything he ran at Tech. I think I also, though, thought that there'd be things around him working in his favor that would probably be not shielding, that's the wrong word, but like helping cover some of that up, right? And that hasn't happened. So as we're looking around the Big 12, and we'll end on the Houston game because that is still going through my head. It's worth pointing out at halftime, Nevada and Kansas are tied. Is that right? Yikes. Cincinnati lost their rivalry game with Miami of Ohio, so that's fun to laugh at if we were in a laughing mood. Oklahoma State lost to South Alabama. That's fun to laugh at if you're in a laughing mood. Texas Tech blew out Tarleton State. BYU, I mentioned, beat Arkansas. West Virginia beat Pittsburgh. So maybe they're not as bad as we thought they were. Maybe Pitt's even worse. We'll see. Texas, I guess, did beat Wyoming, but was close for most of the game, it felt like. Maybe resting on the laurels, maybe doing the Texas thing that they do. But also, maybe Wyoming's just not as bad as we thought they were. Missouri beat K-State. I think that's going to hurt their conference as a whole. Oklahoma State blew out Tulsa, so maybe it doesn't. Baylor gets their first win in like almost a full calendar year. Ohio beat Iowa State. That hurts the conference. UCF blew out Villanova. As far as interesting things there go, I think it looks like Oklahoma might be kind of back. And I think it also looks like if TCU can get right, they might make another run, win the conference again. We'll see how things go there. Back to this Houston game, because I do think this impacts conference in a number of ways. One, I think that people are going to look at this like a moment that TCU gets it back some. I think the nation will see this as a loss of a good TCU team, right? It'll take people like you and I that watch the game to start to talk about like, yeah, but also a team they should have beaten, right? My dog is comforting me because he can sense that I'm upset, I think. No, I look at this, and there's people in here talking about efficiency and running game doesn't exist, and it was nationally televised, but it was also televised during like very primetime games. It was televised during Tennessee, Florida, and this Colorado madness and all that kind of stuff. It was on Fox, but that doesn't mean it's the game people wanted to watch. No, I think the deal is people are going to look at this as a game where TCU gets right, and that's how it impacts the conference, right? TCU. The story will be TCU gets right, Houston falls, Houston's not very good. But Houston did not have to fall in this game. I think that continues to be the frustrating thing here is that this game was close for a long time, and frankly, if the offense could just have a pulse, it probably is closer or longer, if not a win. And it's just interesting because a year ago, we watched this same Houston Cougar staff and about half, if not more, of the same athletes. And that was never the problem. Now, I know people are going to say, that's the American, that's it. Like, yes, but they scored a lot of points last year. The problem last year was the other side of the ball. And frankly, in moving up to the Big 12, why didn't the defense struggle tonight like the offense did, right? I don't know. This is interesting. I don't know that I completely agree to look scared. I will say that at some point it did look like, though, that the size of the line mattered. The depth definitely mattered. And so I don't want to act like those things are irrelevant. But Houston didn't score when the guys are fresh either. And I think that's worrisome. I'm interested to see, I got a lot of guys talking about quarterback play and like this, like people were open as his timing wasn't working. I mean, he also hit them in the hands and they dropped it, right? Like I think that I don't think anyone's blameless in this, right? No, so as I go through this, my initial thoughts, if you can't be able to tell, is I have a problem with all the drops, and I want Parker Jenkins to play more, not just because we're both named Parker. I think he's really freaking good at football. And I wonder at what point you guys start looking at those young guys, even if you're trying not to burn their red shirts, because your receivers got to catch football. As far as people talking about Donovan Smith and processing of the offense, again, it's his third game in this offense, and I thought that he'd have an elite receiver core around him. And I think there's still potential for this group to be elite. They just aren't there yet. But like he's had too many drops this season, and he's had guys not coming back to football when he's scrambling, and he's had guys that are running three routes in the same part of the field that there's no possible way that they're all supposed to be that close together. And I don't say that to necessarily make excuses for him, but what I'm saying is more that I knew he would have struggles, and I knew he would have struggles coming into the year because it's his first year in this offense. I mean, in some ways, it's like a freshman coming in, except he played some of the Big 12, so like there'd be a little bit of difference, but he hadn't played for a guy like Dana, hadn't played an offense like Dana's. But if other things were in place and working for him, you could cover up some of those things. I'm not saying he'd be Trent Dilfer, but I am saying I think that you'd be a lot less worried about him taking a sack on second down to make it third and long if you had more faith that the ball would be complete on 3rd and long because the guy wouldn't drop it, right? Or if, him making a pull read to keep the ball on, 2nd and 8, getting hit to make it 3rd and 10, you might feel better about that if you thought he'd have more time to throw on 3rd and 10, right? Like those kinds of things I think are where like football gets way too focused or fandom gets way too focused on a few individual things, coaching, quarterbacks, etc. Like there's a lot of pieces and a lot of moving pieces in this at all times. And that's not to give excuses to guys that don't need excuses. But that's just where my head's at after the game. And that's what I'm looking at. Look across the conference. And I was looking at what comes next. I will say this much. Now, a lot of you guys are talking about there's a lot of fire Dana type commentary in this chat going on throughout the show here, right? And that's your prerogative. That's the thing you want to do. Again, I think it's very common take, half America. I mean, there were people in Alabama, I guarantee you, message boards. So because I saw them before, so I can only imagine after their game today, talking about firing Nick Saban, right? Like people get upset with their coach whenever they lose, whenever they don't play well. And again, that can totally be the direction you want to go. But what I'm going to try and do with this is not just look at what, could happen there, but there's got to be fixes this season, because even if something dramatic and crazy happened this season, you've still got to finish it, right? You still got to find some way to finish the season. And I'm not saying the season's lost because you lost to TCU tonight. Frankly, I'm not saying the season is lost because you lost to Rice. I don't think anyone predicted an undefeated season out of the Houston Cougars this year, as much as it would have been fun to cheer on. But right now they're 1-2. And I can tell you one thing. If they're 1-3 at the end of next week, we've got a lot bigger problems. We're going to break it down into more in depth and detail, look into more schematic kind of stuff, and kind of the impact of stuff, and like post-game talks and what we're hearing, what we're not hearing, injury reports and that kind of stuff on Monday, Tuesday. But as normal, we're going to try and flush this and be done with it by the end of the day, Tuesday, moving into the next game starting Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, getting ready for Sam Houston State, getting ready for looking forward and kind of what comes next throughout the season. Sam Houston State, I don't think is that bad. I think that's something what, frankly, I have to compare and look for. Rushing yards, we've talked about this a little bit, but again, the running scheme that Houston's running doesn't seem to pair well with their offensive line / running backs. I think there's some it's not that any of them are even bad pieces as I see them. They're just not quite all in the same puzzle box. So anyway, I think there's a lot of things left to do this season. I think we're feeling particularly down to 1-2, and both of those two feel like games we could have, if not should have, won. But we're only a fourth of the way through. We got another 3/4 of the season to go. And I think that there are some ways that this thing spins positively. Here we go. This guy. Yes, that's the comment. Get bowl eligible. Big 12 looks down this year. Yes, that's the positivity we're going to end on. That's the thing we're going to do. Not this one about the season being over. No, we're going back to this one. We're going back to this one. Get bowl eligible. Big 12 looks down this year. Why not? Why not? 3/4 of the season left. Lots of time left to do it. Lots of games left to do it. We're doing it here each and every day at Locked On Cougs. We'll be talking to you again on Monday again to wrap up this game. Monday and Tuesday's episodes will be about the TCU game and what all happened there. And then we'll talk more about things looking at Sam Houston State afterwards. Thank you all so much for being Locked On Cougs. There's a lot of other post-game content out there. We appreciate you choosing us first and making us your first listen. Lots of other Cougs stuff to go listen to afterwards. Also, go check out my buddy Drake at Locked On Big 12. They're covering the entire conference. We want to see how other teams are doing. Check that show out as well. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Cougs your number one Locked On Cougar podcast, or number one Cougar podcast. And as always, Locked On Cougs, the primary Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Go Cougs.